So I know nobody uses those phrases, but that is what it is. So I joked the other day, I didn't know if Texas A&M was going to incur a luxury tax, and how much they paid for their signing class.
I know it's been on your mind. So you stacked top 10 classes together now for 4 years in a row. I don't think there was ever even 2 before that. So do you kind of consider it a slap in the face or whatever when there's these thoughts out there that it's because a lot of money is being spent and just your thoughts?
Here's what I'm going to say, and this is point blank. This is point blank because here's my problem. There is no $30 million fund. There is no $5 million. There is no 10. This is garbage, okay? And it pisses me off that people, and here it comes from a site called Bro Bible by a guy named Sliced Bread. Then everybody runs with it. So it's written on the internet, it's gospel. How irresponsible is that? And then we gripe about the transfer portal, and you guys take more than everybody. What's about that? And what goes on? The hypocrisy is a joke. It's an absolute joke, and it's insulting to our staff, how hard we work, to how we do things. It's insulting to Texas A&M because there ain't a better place to go to school and play ball. If you don't like it, we're coming on. Get used to it. All right? We ain't going nowhere. It's an absolute joke. The people who put the hard work in and do it. It's irresponsible, but it's funny when they get it, it's all okay. Ball games are changing, man. And it ain't because of NIL and what goes on. It's pretty irresponsible of all of them. They're clowns.
Go next.
If they got a problem with it, come see me. I ain't a hard guy to find. We'll be in some meetings. You can say anything you want. We can do anything you want. I ain't got no problem with it. I promise you that shit.
Oh, welcome in to the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And got a great show lined up for you. Finish the week strong. Got a terrific guest, Brent Zwerneman of the Houston Chronicle. He's been covering the Texas A&M Aggies for decades. Had a fun conversation with Brent. And again, if you don't know that name, you should. He's the one that broke the news that Texas and Oklahoma were coming to the SEC. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and when that timeline should be. A really good deep dive here on Jimbo Fisher and the NIL. Brent was also the one that asked Jimbo Fisher the question about NIL during the latest Texas A&M press conference that really kind of pushed Jimbo over the edge there. So we talk about all that. Really fun conversation coming up with Brent Zwerneman here in a minute. But, hey, we got a couple of news and notes around the league, including a little bit of drama here down in Birmingham in the headquarters of the SEC. But before we get to all that, the SEC officially announced the league's revenue for the latest fiscal year. And it's, man, these numbers are incredible year in and year out. They just continue to skyrocket up. This year, just over $777 million the SEC generated in total revenue. So they take that $778.8 million to be exact, divide that by the 14 schools, and we've got $54.6 million per SEC institution for the following year, and that is up from, $45 million the previous year. 657 was the number from a year ago. So again, $777 million up from $657 million. Man, is it a good time to be an SEC school. And this right here, no other reason. This is why Texas and Oklahoma are coming to the nation's best conference. They want a piece of this pie. And by adding Texas and Oklahoma, the SEC is just going to add to this total, which is going to skyrocket when the new TV figures come in. Remember, this is still under the old contract of the CBS, SEC on CBS. CBS really getting the better shake of this deal. The SEC is going to get astronomically more money, about 4 times as much through TV revenue when they shift to ESPN, ABC in the years to come, and adding Texas and Oklahoma. Man, it's good to be in the SEC. I'll just say that. And speaking of that, one little news item here I thought SEC fans would appreciate. We don't have a ton of details on this, but Peyton and Eli Manning, their Monday Night Football broadcast, officially signed on for 3 more years. And, we certainly enjoyed that this season. I hope you guys did too if you got to catch it. But the more interesting aspect of this new deal for Peyton and Eli and their Manning cast, whatever they call it, they're going to start doing UFC, golf, and more importantly, college football is a part of this deal. Now, certainly I don't think they're going to be calling every week a game or anything like that. Don't have any details on the games they plan to cover. They really missed out on an opportunity to cover Ole Miss at Tennessee last week with Eli and Peyton's connections to those schools, obviously. But Arch Manning likely headed to the SEC. Will Peyton and Eli be calling one of his games? That'd be pretty interesting. I don't know if they want to do that necessarily. I know Peyton didn't want to even play against Eli. I don't know if he's going to be calling his nephew's football games, but that is going to be something to watch. And with Peyton and Eli involved, you can be sure there's going to be SEC coverage mixed in to the Peyton and Eli Manning cast. So cannot wait to see that. And how about this little nugget here? I thought this was great. South Carolina officially announced their spring game Saturday, April 16th. That's not necessarily the noteworthy thing here. The Gamecocks are going to kick this thing off in the evening, 7 o'clock p.m. It's going to be quite the scene down there in Columbia. And we already got people tagging Cousin Shane and I. We need to get our ass down there. Hey, maybe that's a challenge there to Cousin Shane. I'd love to go down there to Columbia for the South Carolina spring game. So maybe we can get that worked out. I got to make sure the big Tennessee homer is on board before we make anything official. But Saturday, April 16th, I love these night spring games. Adds a little extra juice to it. It's going to be an all-day festivities down there in Columbia leading up to the year 2 era of the Shane Beamer era, of course. This is going to be pretty wild. And there's a lot of hype around South Carolina right now. So maybe we can get this thing going. And one other thing here before we get down to what happened in Birmingham on Thursday, which was quite the scene. Chris Kiffin, recently hired by his brother Lane to be co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach for the Ole Miss Rebels, jumping back to the NFL. That was first reported by Chris Lowe of ESPN and confirmed by many outlets, but man, there's just the latest case. We call this the Austin Davis effect. You come from the NFL to college football, you get a taste of the recruiting, you get a taste of life in the SEC, and you say, well, hell, it wasn't that bad in the NFL. We didn't have to do no recruiting. So I don't know if that's exactly what happened here, but certainly feels like it. So Chris Kiffin jumping back to the NFL after just a couple of weeks on the job there in Oxford. Ole Miss going to have to find them a new co-defensive coordinator to pair with Chris Partridge. And it certainly was interesting when Lane hired his brother, given Chris's connections to Ole Miss and being on Hugh Freeze's staff back in the day. But, this is the wild, wild west here. We get, it's not just the transfer portal. It's these coaches making moves left and right. And you just never know what's going to come next in the SEC. Well, speaking of coach movement, and we still don't have anything quite on Bryan Harsin, but he did make his appearance here at the SEC coaches meetings here on Thursday in Birmingham, and there was reporters camped out. Apparently, they were told there's 2 entrances to the building, back entrance, front entrance, and wouldn't you know it, 12 of the SEC coaches went through the front door, and then 2 coaches found a mysterious third side door into the building. And of course, Bryan Harsin was one of them. I mean, they must have people in the bushes out here, something camp out looking at all these doors. We don't have an image of Harsin walking in the door. We just got an image of him with his back towards the camera. I mean, how sick are we in the SEC that this is what we're doing on a Thursday in February? But this was all SEC Twitter was a buzz about here on Thursday. Bryan Harsin did, in fact, make it to this meeting to talk about the rules and all this that's going on in the SEC. These are not major meetings that typically have any kind of big proclamation at the end, but they have these meetings, they have the SEC spring meetings, and then they kind of will come to new rules and things of that nature, which that happens leading up to SEC Media Days, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see what comes of it, but it's just interesting. Bryan Harsin showed up, and then we got all these cameras just waiting in anticipation for this man to walk out the door so we can ask him questions. And here is a video of Bryan Harsin coming out the door, and there were so many damn reporters that, I mean, the man walked to the wrong vehicle. He had to do a circle around the wrong vehicle he was trying to get into. But, man, what a sight. I'm going to throw this up on the YouTube channel, but just what a mess this is. And I just think it's hilarious that this guy, no comment, didn't even say the word no comment, but that was his reply. So you're not missing much with the audio. But if you do listen carefully at the tail end, this is perfect. Just listen to this fan in the background.
Do you plan to be the coach at Auburn next season?
Are you taking part in Auburn's investigation as a program?
Good.
I got another coach.
So if you missed it there, that wasn't, I hope it wasn't a media member, but hell, maybe it was, but certainly sound like an Auburn fan. Hang in there, coach. War Eagle. Would have been a little bit better if he said War Damn Eagle, but hey, Bryan Harsin's got him some support among Auburn fans. They got about 24 of them there on the plains as we saw the protest, but I just thought that was hilarious. The only other noteworthy thing here, Kirby Smart pulled up in a minivan. He was the only one to pull up in a minivan. And then Coach Leach, he had a message. He was about the only one that acknowledged all these poor reporters that showed up to try to get something from Harsin and got nothing. Let's kick it over to Mike Leach real quick.
Hey, drink more water.
Yes, sir.
Stay hydrated.
Hey, good morning.
How you doing?
Good morning.
Valuable lesson there. Stay hydrated from the coach of Mississippi State Bulldogs. I just thought that was hilarious. But yeah, so this is basically what we're reduced to at mid-February. Coaches walking in and out of a building. That is the most drama we're getting here leading up to the weekend. And who knows, maybe we'll get a resolution in this Bryan Harsin situation. But until then, him walking around these cars is going to be played endlessly on Twitter. And it's hilarious. I even saw a compilation someone did of these coaches getting in their cars. I mean, these SEC media members are having a good damn time down there in Birmingham here on Thursday. I'll tell you that. All right, but enough fooling around with all that garbage. We do got a really, really outstanding interview here with Brent Zwerneman of the Houston Chronicle. I think all SEC fans, and particularly Texas A&M, will appreciate Brent and the knowledge he's dropped here on the show. We're pleased to once again be joined by Brent Zwerneman. He's an outstanding SEC insider, covers Texas A&M for the Houston Chronicle, and he's authored several books on the Texas A&M Aggies. So, Brent, thank you so much for once again joining the show. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Mike. Hopefully one of those books one day will be talking about A&M. I'm not even going to say winning a national. I'm going to say making the college football playoff, because I've done this for a quarter century now, and still, I covered one conference champion in 1998. So maybe now they'll be, closing in on that elusive national title that they've been seeking since 1939.
Well, it could be worse, Brent. You could be covering this mess down at Auburn. How fortunate are you to not be having to cover the Bryan Harsin saga?
Isn't that the truth? Because you do get the idea with Jimbo, and I'll say this, and feel like I know him pretty well. The man is all about football. The man loves, breathes, eats, however you want to put it, football. And I feel like there's just, if we're, I don't think, and maybe let me find some wood to knock on here, Mike, that any kind of like off the field scandals or anything, that's just really not even part of the equation, because Jimbo's just so wrapped up in coaching this football team and trying to get them back and proving that he can do it in more than one place, and that he didn't just take over for Bobby Bowden at a historically or recently historically good program at Florida State and win a title. He wants to show he can do it at a place that it hasn't been done since pre-World War II.
Now, the main reason I wanted to have you on, Brent, is, of course, to talk about, A&M's incredible success on the recruiting trail and all that entails with that. But before I ask you about that, is there a sense at all in College Station around that program that last season was maybe a little bit of a disappointment when you consider the team they had, and of course they knocked off Alabama, which you predicted they would do in the preseason, yet they turn around and they lose to the Mississippi schools, they lose to Arkansas, they lose that heartbreaker to LSU. What's the sense there of last season of just kind of dropping the ball a little bit there?
Yeah, Mike, I predicted an A&M win over Alabama, but I also did not predict Mississippi State and Mike Leach would roll into Kyle Field and get a victory. So, and of course, Arkansas with Sam Pittman in his second year, they topple the Aggies up in Arlington at that neutral site game this year for the first time in years. So those things were head scratchers because honestly, that schedule that the Aggies had was probably their most favorable since they've joined the SEC from the Big 12 in 2012, because their non-conference schedule was very forgiving in years past. Like when Jimbo took over, they had Clemson as a non-conference foe, and he joked that he thought he was getting away from them by leaving the ACC and so forth. So if there was going to be a year where they were going to be right in the mix and competing for an SEC title, especially getting Alabama and Auburn on your home field, I thought it was going to be 2021. So, yeah, they pulled off the upset, but absolutely, to answer your question, there was a ton of disappointment with the idea that they finished 8-4 in the regular season. I think early in the year they had risen as high as number 5 in the nation. Of course, last year they'd finished number 4. Here's what happened, of course. Haynes King had won the starting quarterback job over Zach Calzada, and Haynes King went down with a broken leg in week 2 and was out for the season. Well, Jimbo had told us that it was a fairly close competition. Now, it probably wasn't as close as all that, but he had also said both guys are NFL quarterbacks. So I kind of took him on his word on that. Well, Zach Calzada had an awful lot of growing to do still at that point. And of course, he did manage to pull off the upset of Alabama, but that was probably their biggest thing that held them back was quarterback play in terms of being, right in the mix for the SEC title. The defense, of course, was once again outstanding under Mike Elko. So you wonder what would have happened if Haynes King had stayed healthy. But on the flip side, Jimbo brought Zach Calzada to A&M as a scholarship quarterback with the idea that he would compete for starter. So you wouldn't have thought that there would be as much drop-off as there is. Now that's what's shaping up is with Calzada now gone to Auburn, as you mentioned, the mess going on there. Now that's really shaping up as probably the most interesting storyline of the offseason for the Aggies, what's going to happen at quarterback.
Now, how surprised were you, Brent? You were the one that asked the question in the National Signing Day press conference, Jimbo Fisher and all this NIL discussion and, the rival coaches even essentially saying A&M's only having success because they're paying for all these players. And it really seemed like, Jimbo Fisher took personal offense to this and really wanted to get this off his chest. And as a secondary question, have you tracked down Sliced Bread? You got an interview with him yet?
I'm still trying to find Eric Dickerson's Trans Am that Texas A&M or Texas A&M booster allegedly gave us. So I'm trying to take it one mystery at a time here, Mike. They were saying, I don't know what happened to that Trans Am. I gave it to a buddy, and then so on and so forth. But no Sliced Bread. To answer your second question, the first question was Jimbo could not wait to get that off his chest. We had not visited with him since back during the holidays when they were still planning on going to the Gator Bowl at that time before COVID-19 issues kept them out of the Gator Bowl against Wake Forest. So Jimbo was, I happened to have the microphone first, and he could not wait. And I asked a short question, and he took it for the next 3 or 4 minutes. And I do see his point in that, okay, Mike, I've covered A&M, football for close to a quarter century, was gone for a couple of years there, somewhere in the middle. I had never covered more than 2 top 10 classes in a row. No coach had ever put more than 2 together. Jimbo, this was his 4th consecutive top 10, all 4 classes being his first full recruiting classes. Now, of course, he inherited one when he came on board that was not top 10. So it wasn't like they went from number 45 in recruiting suddenly to number 1. I mean, they had been in the top 10. He had built to this. They were 9-1 last year with the number 4 finish, win in the Orange Bowl. Things were looking up. So all that played into it. But also there is no doubt 100% that the NIL aspect has helped the Aggies as well. You've got 500,000 former students, oil money, as I said, deeper pockets than a West Texas oil well, in terms of putting all that together. And even Ross Bjork, the athletic director at A&M, told me, he goes, yeah, they feel fortunate to have this incredible fan base that's so passionate about football. So you combine those things. You combine the relentless recruiting of Jimbo Fisher and his staff, which no doubt they have been getting after it from the time he stepped foot on campus, to the NIL, the new way of doing things in the prospects there. I'll put it that way, in terms of being able to have a good life in college, financially. So you put all those things together, and suddenly they have the, what was ended up being the number 1 ranked class of all time. I really shouldn't say of all time. None of us should. It's really in the internet era, because as we know, you go back to before there were scholarship limits, a program back in the day like Texas or what have you, or Alabama, they would stock up on guys that would never even see the field, but they would keep them away from other programs. So you can't really say all time, but you can certainly say of the internet era of the past couple of decades that this class was up there. So yeah, it's a combination of such. But I will say Jimbo's done, he's hardcore on the recruiting front, and he gets after it. And, and you've seen this place is pretty crazy on a college football Saturday as well, which certainly helps draw recruits.
Do you think Jimbo took that personally at all? Because it certainly seems to me that Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, and of course to a lesser extent Lane Kiffin, it seems like they're threatened that A&M is going to continue at this historic pace of recruiting. And of course Georgia and Alabama, they're used to getting whoever they want, and now it doesn't seem. And now it almost, I don't want to say evens the playing field, because we're still only talking about a handful of teams here, but it just seems like it's elevated A&M, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
I don't think so. The way Jimbo put it was, in talking directly to his coaches through the press conference, get used to it, as he said, because we're not going anywhere, was the quote. I will say this, with these guys that they were able to bring on board, 7 5-stars. And I've been around this program long enough where I remember it was a big deal when they got 1 5-star in a class. Mm-hmm. Now suddenly they have 7. But you were able to, with A&M especially losing a lot of guys on the defensive line and everything to the NFL, they were able to promise, or, hey, you're going to have every opportunity to have early playing time. When you step foot on campus, chances are you're going to be playing as a true freshman in front of 100,000 fans. So I do think that helped. So I'll be curious to see as they continue to stack these classes on board. Jimbo's then going to have to change it to, hey, you want to be a part of this program that can help eventually get you to the NFL and perhaps even redshirt and so forth. So the message is maybe going to have to change a little bit, because with these guys, like even Connor Wegman, the quarterback, hey, 5-star guy out of Houston, Connor, you're going to get a chance. You're going to get a chance to start as a freshman. So, but yes, with the combination of, Jimbo's recruiting and the NIL, that certainly can't be discounted. That you would think moving forward, as long as the NCAA keeps it like this, that A&M is going to be a major player on that front.
Now, I don't know if the expectations can get any higher in College Station. I mean, when Jimbo got hired, they famously gave him the national championship trophy with the date yet to be determined. Does signing a class of this stature, does it raise the expectations that that promise will be fulfilled by Jimbo and his staff?
It certainly should, and yeah, and he knows that. He said the next step is, can they play? As he said, can that dog hunt? In terms of, you got to get them out on the field and coach them up and develop them as well. But there is no question with Jimbo's recent raise again, an extension of a few years again to his contract to make it the original 10 years that it was a few years ago, up in the $9 to $10 million range when it all adds up annually. No question about it that there are huge expectations, and he knows that. He's aware of that, which I think is also part of his recent, rants or whatever you want to call it. He knows that the expectations are big now in College Station, and that they're, and for instance, okay, Mike, A&M beat Alabama. That was at Kyle Field, and it was a close game. 41-38 came down to a last-second field goal. Well, he's well aware now. Texas A&M is going to Bryant-Denny Stadium in 2022, and the Crimson Tide are mad, and they've been stacking these number 1 and 2 classes together for years, whereas A&M is still new to it. He's aware of all that, but he's also aware that A&M fans don't really want to hear that. They want to compete for a conference title for the first time in 20. It's been almost a quarter century. You're getting in that range now, because it was 1998 when they last won a conference title, and that was as part of the Big 12 when they upset Kansas State, when Kansas State would have been playing in the national title game. They haven't really come close since then, and now they've been a decade in the SEC. So all those things add up to A&M fans saying, okay, it's time. There are no more excuses. This is now the time to be in the mix for an SEC title. And as you know, if you're in the mix for an SEC title, then you're probably going to be in the mix for a national title as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you sense any, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but from the alumni, from the administration, from the coaches, everybody involved with Texas A&M to ensure that their program is on a higher level than the Texas Longhorns currently? But we all know the Longhorns are coming to the SEC. Do you think that any of this NIL and the recruiting success has anything to do with trying to ensure that they remain ahead of Texas before the Longhorns get into the SEC? Because I think it's clear that A&M's at an advantage at the moment, but they've got to keep the steam on if they're gonna stay ahead of Texas before Texas comes into the league.
The sense I've gotten from Ross Bjork, the athletic director, John Sharp, the chancellor, and on down the line, I don't really know the new president, Kathy Banks. I haven't really gotten to know her, yet. She's, I believe, been in that position less than a year, right around a year, and that they believe in Jim. Like, they don't feel like Jimbo needs any prodding, and from what I've seen, he doesn't. I mean, the man is absolutely driven, and all these things to prove people wrong and to prove that he can do it at A&M. So I don't see that kind of pressure. If you were going to say there was pressure, it would definitely be from the former students who are saying, okay, we've paid all this money. We put $500 million into Kyle Field 5-6 years ago. Now it's time. And to your point, Mike, I personally, as a fifth generation Texan, I was really excited to hear, because when Texas was, when we found out they were going to the SEC, my first thought wasn't about the Longhorns competing in the SEC. It was, hey, that means the game is back. Mm-hmm. And by the game, I mean A&M versus Texas, which was the biggest deal in the state for decades. And suddenly it was gone. Poof, it's been gone for the past decade. So yes, there is no question now that the bar has been raised in terms of saying, okay, now Texas can also recruit to the best league in the nation by far, and make these promises of saying, hey, these guys are all headed to the NFL. You can be too. So A&M certainly wants to keep that momentum going, because as we've already seen with Texas having the number 5 overall class, NIL came into big play with them as well. They Horns with Heart was this charity organization that was cranked up with the idea of giving the offensive linemen $50,000 annually to lend their name to the charity and so forth. So yeah, they're not messing around either on the NIL front. And they were very upfront about that. And suddenly they signed probably their best O-line class in history. Next thing you know, Sarkisian has them up to number 5 in the overall rankings. So it's something I kind of personally look forward to in coming years. Those recruiting battles, those finally on-field battles, really kind of heating up, and that being just a huge deal, not only in the state of Texas, but in the SEC, because the rivalry is back.
Now, of course, you were the one that broke that news, Brent, at SEC Media Days. I mean, everybody was doing double takes. I think even on SEC Network, on live television, they basically dismissed the whole Texas and Oklahoma coming to the SEC. And if memory serves, it was about 72 hours later it was official. I cannot recall anything happening at that warp speed, but considering your outstanding insight and news-breaking ability, can you provide any insight into maybe an updated timeline and into when Texas and Oklahoma could be joining the SEC? And last thing for you, because you just referenced it, I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm dying to see Texas and Texas A&M on the field again. When the Longhorns come to the SEC, do you anticipate that will be an annual matchup? Because I know there was, some speculation that may not be the case. What can you tell us about any of that?
Yeah, the timeline, I really thought, Mike, going back to the summer, because I'd seen it a decade ago with Texas A&M when things just really, to use your term, really picked up with warp speed when the Aggies said they were exiting the Big 12 and then Missouri hopped on as well for the SEC, that it went from, hey, that's in a couple of years to 1 year. I really thought at that time it was going to pick up speed so much that it was going to be 2022. Mm-hmm. From what I understand, Texas had the money ready to roll. Of course, they had the Longhorn Network that they were ready to roll into the SEC Network and so forth, and ESPN. Oklahoma was maybe the one a little behind on that front. I still say I do not see how it would drag past 2023 at this point in terms of saying that's, I just don't see it being any later than that at this point. And also, yes, absolutely on the annual rivalry, because it's not just a little bit of a moneymaker. It's a massive moneymaker on that front. So it will definitely be an annual rivalry, 1 year in College Station, 1 year in Austin, none of this neutral site type stuff. They're going to get it back to campus, and it will be every year and around Thanksgiving weekend, just like the old days, because that was, back in the day when the Dallas Cowboys would play the Houston Oilers, that was a pretty big deal. Mm-hmm. But Texas A&M versus Texas is the biggest sporting event in the state of Texas, and people outside, what Aggies and Longhorns have to understand, they say, oh, we don't really want that, especially the Aggies. We don't need that series. It's bigger than that. It's for the state of Texas. It's for Texans, in this area, this region. And so that's why it will be back on an annual basis, because they're not going to pass up that opportunity to make a ton of money off of it as well.
All right, some outstanding stuff there, Brent. I really, really appreciate it. Everyone give Brent Zwerneman a follow on Twitter at Brent Zwerneman, and check out all his outstanding work over at the Houston Chronicle covering Texas A&M and the SEC. Brent, thank you again for joining the show. Really, really appreciate it.
You bet, Mike, and I really appreciate you not asking me about Texas A&M basketball, so thank you.
All right, so just want to say thanks again to Brent for joining the show. One of the best, not only news breakers in the SEC, he's breaking news left and right when it comes to the Aggie program and what's going on with Jimbo's Texas A&M Aggies. You got to give him a follow on Twitter and check out all his work for the Houston Chronicle. And just thanks again for the quality time that he's provided me on this show. I really, really appreciate it. But hey, that's going to do it for this week's editions of the show. Hopefully we'll get Cousin Shane. I have confirmation. He is back from vacation. Shane takes a vacation for about 3 weeks, while the rest of us gets 4 or 5 days down there in Florida. He is just now on his way back. So hopefully maybe we'll get Cousin Shane on here to break down the Super Bowl, something like that. We didn't even get to talk much about that, but that game is loaded with SEC talent on both sides of the ball, Cincinnati and the Rams. That's going to be a fun game to watch, with, even if you're not a fan of either one of those teams, which I'm not, but I'm looking forward to it with all the SEC connections. So have a great time this weekend. Check out the Super Bowl. Be safe, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next one.